And we are back with another episode of the Kyle Lanslone Show. And we are coming to you a little bit later today. The family Easter festivities ran a little bit into today, so we had to bump the show later, but it actually, I think, kind of works out well. So I can really do a recap of all the absolutely insane things that Donald Trump said today. We should all be very concerned about the direction that this country is going. Not only the war in Iran, but also the war here at home, as we'll touch on. So, starting off talking about Trump's insane threats, was it a rescue operation or is that cover for something else? We're going to talk about backing Iranians. Trump says the U.S. shipped some weapons to Iran and a new crackdown coming soon. So, let's start off here with this absolutely insane post. I don't even know how to begin to describe it. This, by the way, was put out at 8 a.m. on Easter Sunday here in the United States of America. Trump writes, Tuesday will be power plant and bridge day, all wrapped into one in Iran. There will be nothing like it. Open the effing straits, you crazy bastards, or you will be living in hell. Just watch. Please, praise be to Allah. Donald Trump, the president of the United States, actually posted that on his True Social account. It's not, I'm sure, like yourselves, I went to True Social, had to go through all those absurd ads to look and make sure that the president of the United States actually wrote this and it wasn't some, delayed April Fool's Day AI generated image. No, the president actually said this. So of course there is the insane parts of it, right? The fact that he's saying praise be to Allah on Easter, that he's threatening to blow up the country, right? That he's saying that we're going to destroy power plants and bridges, things that this is an open statement of that the United States is going to commit war crimes. I mean, it's just, even if the United States was actually thinking of doing this, even if Donald Trump wanted the Iranians to think he was going to do this, right, it could be conveyed privately through the bat channels. It doesn't have to be something that the president is actually posting on his True Social account, but that's what Donald Trump is doing here. So, I mean, that is crazy, calling them crazy bastards. I mean, really, what the second time I read this several times because I was really trying to get my head around again that the president of the United States, the most powerful man in the world, the man, the commander in the chief, seemingly the man able to direct at his whim the military might, the greatest military might the world has ever known, is writing this. And I came to the conclusion that this man is just must be listening to a lot of Mark Levin. This sounds to me a lot like Mark Levin. So, calling the Iranians, you crazy bastards, effing this. I mean, I don't know how else to explain how we got here. Now, I do think statements like this and other things we'll get into on today's show actually raise the question of, does Donald Trump have the mental capacity to be president of the United States of America? And look, I know this isn't a popular conversation to have, especially after the Joe Biden presidency, where you did have a president who was clearly demented and in a different way than Donald Trump is, where Donald Trump has really just lost all inhibition at this point and is just, doing whatever he thinks sounds good in the moment, even if he believes that it's actually a bad idea and going to backfire, as we'll get to later in the show. He's just doing these things on whims. And that is actually far more dangerous and problematic than Joe Biden essentially being too mentally inept to run the White House and having people in the shadows like Antony Blinken and others, Susan Rice and people like that, really directing the administration. Particularly because Donald Trump has surrounded himself with real swamp creature cretin types like Marco Rubio and Pete Hegseth, and also people who are just cowards like Tulsi Gabbard and JD Vance who are unwilling to say, like, our president is getting our troops killed. Our president is hurting the American economy. Our president is making it so it's going to be harder and harder for Americans to live. Our president is threatening to commit war crimes. He's blowing up schools. We're doing all kinds of horrific things across the world, and they're just too cowardly to call it out. And so, at a time where, if there was ever a time to use the 25th Amendment, it seems like it's now. Before Donald Trump orders this ground invasion of Iran or whatever escalation that he has planned for Tuesday, because it's going to be absolutely horrific. The consequences of this, not just for the poor Iranian souls, who many of whom will probably die in whatever Donald Trump is going to order, but also for the global economy and for Americans. Not that this is necessarily the most important issue, because again, it's the Iranians, it's the Saudis, the Emiratis, the Bahrainians, who really their lives are more on the line in this war than the Americans. But we are going to suffer economically, and that is just what most Americans care about, is the own standard of their livelihood. So this is this is crazy. And look, you say Donald Trump wrote this on Easter Sunday a couple weeks ago. He said he was going to blow up Iran's power plants, and then he ultimately backed down. And certainly we could be looking at that possibility. However, today Donald Trump actually doubled down on this claim. So let's roll this first clip of Donald Trump.
Rescue that's very historic. It'll go down in the books. Late Thursday night, an American F-15 fighter jet went down deep inside enemy territory in Iran while participating in Operation Epic Fury, where we're doing unbelievably well, well at a level that nobody's ever seen before. The entire country can be taken out in one night, and that night might be tomorrow night.
It's hard to even respond to these type of remarks talking about destroying an entire country. I mean, Iran is a massive country, and so it's a country of 92 million people. And so this certainly is a threat that goes beyond using conventional arms. Maybe he's just talking about we take out the entire country. Maybe he's implying we're going to take out their entire electric grid, or we're going to blow up all their bridges, we're going to blow up their hospitals, we're going to effectively destroy the country. But it does seem like he's almost trying to set the stage to use nuclear weapons in Iran, to just really, drop a couple nukes and make it so that Iran is no longer a society of people. I'm very concerned that at this point that is the president's goal. Now, there are some people who are kind of painting this as the art of the deal, that Donald Trump is just making these really big bluffs because he just needs to get the Iranians to back down, to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, to make a new nuclear deal with the United States of America, to limit their ballistic missile program to 300 kilometers or whatever the Israelis want. But the Iranians aren't going to go for that. The Israelis don't believe Israel is going to go for that. In fact, we got this article here from Haaretz. Israel doubts U.S.-Iran talk, prepares for extensive strike, sources say. And so an Israeli senior political official talked to Haaretz and said that Israel has a full bank of civilian targets in Iran that they want to hit, and they're just waiting for the White House to give them the green light to do so. And they believe that Donald Trump is going to do that after this 48-hour deadline expires, after that would be 8 p.m. on Tuesday evening that Iran has to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, which, the Iranians say that they're not going to do. This today from Drop Site News, they have a couple of really important posts here. They say that the Pakistanis were attempting to broker a deal between the United States and Iran. Now, this does seem to be U.S. initiated. I don't think Islamabad would have gotten involved in all of this if it wasn't for the Americans pushing them to do so. But the proposal that the Pakistanis sent to the Americans and the Iranians included a reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, the lifting of some sanctions on Iran, and a 14 to 21-day ceasefire in order to finalize the deal to hammer out the details. And fairly quickly, the Iranians said that they're not interested in negotiations with the United States of America, and they rejected this proposal. The Iranians have made it clear that they're really not in negotiations here, and I do think that is the reality, that essentially Iran has been willing to receive messages from the United States of America, but they're just publicly stating their demands, future sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz, the U.S. paying war reparations to Iran, security guarantees to ensure this doesn't happen again, and the lifting of U.S. sanctions on Iran. I mean, big ass from the Iranians. And this is actually a question that I'm very much looking forward to ask our Thursday guest on the show. That is Trita Parsi. Exactly what happens when or when the Iranians are firm on this agreement? What does Donald Trump do when the Iranians are demanding something that the president is very unlikely to agree to? So, by the way, subscribe to the channel to catch that interview on Thursday with Trita. I am really, really looking forward to that one. So that, seems to be the status of the ongoing negotiations, are not ongoing negotiations, but the diplomatic, to the extent that it exists, process is being shut down by the Iranians. They've made their demands. Washington isn't anywhere near it. So it seems like this war is going to continue for some time. Now, I do want to take a minute here, or a few minutes, to talk about the developments on the ground, how this war is actually playing out, because there was this really big event at the end of last week that unfolded over the weekend. That is, one U.S. F-15 was shot down above Iran. It seems, initially they reported that the shoot down was fairly close to the Persian Gulf. Later, it turns out it's in Isfahan, Iran, which is the site of one of Iran's major nuclear facilities. An A-10 and some other aircraft were also damaged, destroyed, or shot down during operations to attempt to rescue and retrieve the pilot and the co-pilot in that operation. So this has really sparked all kinds of speculation, and I think there's a lot of really interesting points to how all this developed. So I have this post here. This is Armchair Warlord on X, and he summarized the kind of the position that some people are taking, that this F-15 shoot down happened, right? And the pilot was recovered. Initially, the co-pilot was missing, but that co-pilot was actually rescued in a covert operation that they haven't revealed yet, that went very smoothly, that only involved a couple of helicopters. And what is publicly being described as the rescue of the co-pilot was actually an attempt to seize the 60% enriched material of uranium that is held by the Iranians. So with that, he's alleging here that this mission goes poorly, that it doesn't work out, that the U.S. ends up having to evacuate and destroy all their equipment on the ground. However, I think Larry Johnson today put this all together very, very well on Judging Freedom with Andrew Napolitano. Now, I do know that this is a little bit of a longer clip, but I usually have Larry on the show Monday, so I felt like, I could play a little bit extra Larry for you guys. So let's go ahead and listen to how Larry breaks down this event.
And he was a lieutenant colonel that served. He was a task force commander with JSOC back in Iraq some years ago. He had an entirely different take on it. He was arguing from the standpoint that it was a ruse, but again, you don't. If you're going to stage this, I don't see why you would have had the Pave Hawks on scene, because those would have been used ostensibly to launch. If you're going to really launch the raid then on the nuclear site, you're going to need something to carry the troops in. The little birds are, just carrying in 8 guys. So if there are 4 little birds, you got four operators per bird that are sitting on the skids. That gives you 16 of them, and then you got a pilot or two um, for each bird. So that you got 20 personnel there. You would need more to go into one of the tunnels at the nuclear facility or storage site in Isfahan. Also, how would you, if you were going to take material from that, how are you going to get it out? So you would have had something like a Chinook 47 that would have a lift capability to pull it out. So you just didn't have all the assets on scene here that you would have used if you were going to actually carry out that kind of raid. And that's why I think it appears more that the unit, the JSOC unit that had been prepared to carry out this operation, the raid, they were diverted to this task because both of the seniority of the person that was they were trying to rescue, as well as the location.
So I mean, I don't have a whole lot to add to what Larry said. What he's pointing out with the forces and everything, I think makes a whole lot more sense than this being an operation to try to recover Iran's stockpile of 60% enriched uranium. But it's still interesting. There seems to be a lot of questions here beyond the narrative that's being put forward by the White House at this time. Now, Donald Trump had something else very, very interesting to say about the war in Iran today. So let's roll this next clip of Donald Trump.
Taking care of the Iranian people if you're bombing.
Yeah, who are you with? Who are you with?
PBS. Okay.
Well, that's a radical left group of lunatics that you're with.
Sir,
Let me just tell you, very fair question.
So
the
pause it
Iranian
there.
people.
This is amazing, right? So he gets asked a question. He asks what outlet the reporter's from. He then insults the outlet in a way that is significant, right? The president of the United States, far left radical. If this is just Donald Trump, not president of the United States, it's no big deal. It's not anything worth remarking on. But as we'll talk about in our next story, as these, the labels like far left radical become something that the FBI uses to target individuals who are associated with far left radical groups, the president making these labels of journalistic outlets is actually significant, something that we should take notice of. And then after that, he goes, it's a fair question. Right, so he insults the reporter, he insults the outlet, and they acknowledges, that she's actually just asking a fair question here. So then he goes on with his answer.
They don't hear bombs go off. They're upset. They want to hear bombs because they want to be free. And the only reason they're not out protesting, that, is because they were informed that if they protest, like the wrestler and his friends, if they protest, they will be shot immediately.
All right, so pause it there. A few things here. First of all, it was Donald Trump that told the protesters not to go out into the street right now because we're bombing. It wasn't the Iranian government. Now, the idea that the Iranian people, when their schools are being blown up, when their bridges, when their power plants, when they don't have electricity, when they don't have clean water, when they don't have homes, when all the roads and all this infrastructure has been destroyed, that they're sitting there and they're going, we want more bombs, America, kill more Iranians, go Donald Trump. That simply isn't the case. Right? Like Donald Trump could maybe try to feed this narrative to Americans, and maybe Cat Turd and a few other diehard MAGAs on X are going to just keep lapping it up and believing that when an Iranian child dies, that girl's father goes, well, at least she won't have to grow up wearing a burqa. And that's just how they think about it, right? That they need liberation from this oppressive Islamic government so badly that they don't care when American bombs murder their family members, their friends, their countrymen, when they blow up their schools and their hospitals, right? Like this obviously is in no way how any Iranian thinks whatsoever. Now, I do worry that this is maybe more than just propaganda, that this is more than just Donald Trump spouting off lies. Maybe there are people in his administration. There are certainly a few Iranians every once in a while that, they get on Fox News, Iranian Americans who say, oh, they spoke with their family members back home, and these American bombs are just filled with little constitutions and are bringing freedom and democracy. And every single bomb gets us one step closer to overthrowing the mullahs and instilling a true government of the people, right? Like, so maybe Donald Trump actually believes it at this point, that if he's just, getting his information on this war from Mark Levin and Fox News and Pete Hegseth and Marco Rubio, maybe he really does believe some insanity like that, in which case, who knows how many bombs he's willing to drop on the Iranians if he thinks the Iranians like it. All right, let's keep going.
Edict, that's in writing. If they protest, if they go out in the streets, they will be immediately shot. If they don't have guns, we sent some guns, but the group that was supposed to give, which I said would happen to my people, I said it, I called it exactly. We sent guns, a lot of guns. They were supposed to go to the people so they could fight back against these thugs. You know what happened? The people that they sent them to kept them because they said, what a beautiful gun, I think I'll keep it. So I'm very upset with a certain group of people, and they're going to pay a big price for that.
All right, so pause it there. I mean, again, this is once again crazy, right? Because first of all, Donald Trump is publicly stating that the U.S. provided arms to some Iranian group. Doesn't say who, but I'm sure everyone in Tehran knows there's probably 3 or 4 ethnic groups in Iran, whether maybe it's the Afghan refugees, maybe it's I think the Sunni groups in the south or the Kurds in the north. It's probably one of those groups that these weapons were sent to. And so Iran may be a little bit more concerned about those groups carrying out uprising. Maybe they start ordering some raids against the Iranian Kurds. So I think that's important. Now, another thing that is really important in all of this is Donald Trump in recent days, over the past couple of weeks in particular, has tried to sell to the American people, we never wanted regime change in Tehran. That wasn't what this war was about. That's not what we are trying to do. When here he is clearly, openly stating that we tried to provide guns to an Iranian group to overthrow the government in Tehran. So one of the goals of this operation was absolutely regime change. Now, that's really important is Trump's decision-making progress. Whether it was Netanyahu, Marco Rubio, Pete Hegseth, or whoever else in the administration who came up with this idea to arm the Kurds or whoever else, and they'll overthrow the government in Iran, Donald Trump knew it was stupid. He's saying this was a bad idea. We were going to give them guns and they were going to steal them. I knew this was going to happen, but I did it anyways. If you knew it was going to happen, then why did you do it? Again, this really goes to show that Donald Trump's decision making at this point is beyond just questionable. It's completely unreasonable, unreliable, and it's clearly already costing the Americans their lives. It's destroying the American economy. This is absolutely massively stupid, but I think he's going to talk for just a few more seconds.
The Iranian people will fight back as soon as they know they're not going to be shot and as soon as they can get weapons. If they had weapons, not many of them, if they had weapons that would go in the other way, and you know what would happen? Iran would give up in 2 seconds because they wouldn't be able to take it. But in Iran, they have absolutely no weaponry, and they've been told point blank, if you come out to the streets, you will be killed. As of this morning, and we have this on pretty good information, 45,000 protesters have been killed. Pretty bad.
So 45,000 number. I don't even think there's a CIA funded NGO somewhere in Europe that has claimed that 45,000 Iranian protesters were killed. They were saying 30,000, and even that was clearly um probably like 5 to 6 times too high. I think the Iranians have said the number is around 6,000. And of course, it wasn't all just protesters. There was a lot of security forces killed and also just people caught in the crossfire because it wasn't necessarily protesters against the Iranian government. It was a group of revolutionaries. As Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu and Mossad and Israeli media and American media have made very clear, the protest movement in Iran in January was meant to overthrow the Iranian government with the assistance of hostile foreign intelligence agencies. So, look, I don't support using the American military against other Americans, but clearly there's a difference between the American military just rolling into some city and starting to kill people who are, maybe Black Lives Matter protesters than a group, if let's say a small group had attempted to take over the American city with guns they got from, Russian and Chinese intelligence. Right? If they start killing cops with guns that they got from Russia, then obviously the American government is going to take that as, like an external military threat to our government. And that's how the Iranians responded. And so you can't just say, oh, these were protests. It was clearly something more. Now, look, maybe a lot of those revolutionaries, or Iran might call them terrorists, maybe they had really good ideas. Maybe they did want to overthrow the Islamic religious government of Iran to install a more peaceful government, a government that will give more rights and respect to women, a government that, is going to be less politically oppressive than the current government, more free and fair elections. Some of them may have had those ideas. Others were certainly just out there at the funding, at the behest of the Mossad, to kill Iranian protesters and cause chaos. And again, it's a far different story when that's what was going on than just Iran killing protesters. Now, before we wrap up on today's show, this really important article was published by Ken Klippenstein at his Substack. The title is Exclusive FBI New Political Pre-Crime Center, and he explains President Trump's budget request to Congress contains the largest counterterrorism spending increase in years, and buried inside is a new FBI-led center dedicated to proactively hunting Americans the government classifies as so-called domestic terrorists. The new center and funding boost represent the implementation of Donald Trump's National Security Presidential Memorandum 7, that's NSPM 7. We previously have talked about it and covered it briefly on the show. The sweeping federal order I've been covering since it was signed last September. That's Ken who's been covering it since last September, not me. And then Ken goes on to write, in other words, if your political views are particularly anything other than MAGA, you're on notice courtesy of the FBI. Its creation appears to be inspired by the murder of conservative commenter Charlie Kirk. Now, I want to touch on that last point and highlight that I wasn't a big fan of Charlie Kirk, never paid a whole lot of attention to the guy. But the one thing that a lot of people respected and admired about the guy and his central, principle was we needed to talk to each other and have discussions, and, free speech is the highest American principle. And so if you're, using the memory, the legacy of Charlie Kirk to pass a political pre-crime FBI bureau into law, then obviously, you're really destroying the man's legacy. Now, the bigger problem, of course, is how many of us, how many of the listeners of this show, how many of the, other shows are the guests on this show that, this kind of community of independent media content creators are going to end up being monitored by the FBI because this new center was set up. This is something I'm very concerned about. And then Donald Trump said something today that heightened my concerns even more. So let's play our last clip here of the president.
Extraordinary rescues, because it was two. And as you probably know, we didn't talk about the first one for an hour. And then somebody leaked something, which we'll hopefully find that leaker. We're looking very hard to find that leaker. And talked about there's somebody missing. They basically said that we have one and there's somebody missing. Well, they didn't know there was somebody missing until this leaker gave the information. So whoever it was, we think we'll be able to find it out, because we're going to go to the media company that released it, and we're going to say, national security, give it up or go to jail.
So pause it there. I sometimes wonder if maybe Netanyahu has taken control of Donald Trump, because in Israel you can the government can go to the media and they could say national security. You take that off your website, you're in trouble for publishing it. People could go to jail, I think, for up to 10 years for showing footage of Iranian strikes in Israel. But that's Israel, not the United States of America. In the United States of America, we have a First Amendment that protects journalism, which means the government can't go after an outlet for publishing a article, a story, a scoop, right? And that's what happened here. So Donald Trump can't do this. He may be able to do it. He shouldn't be able to do it. The concern is that he actually will, and that he'll get away with it. But he should not be able to do that in the United States of America. Now, the other point here is, I'm sure that maybe Pete Hegseth and Marco Rubio were painting this as the problem, that, oh, the media released this information, that's why it's bad. You don't think the Iranians were looking for the pilot and the co-pilot the second that F-15 went down? You don't think the Iranians knew that an American fighter pilot crashed in their country, and that the pilots are probably somewhere around the crash site, or, on the trajectory of the crash site, and that they weren't already actively looking for the American pilots? Of course they were. This wasn't a major threat to national security. What it was an absolute humiliation for the Donald Trump administration, because for weeks, Pete Hegseth has been putting on his tough guy suit and going in front of the press and telling them nobody should question this war. We're winning it unquestionably. The Iranians, they're so weak, they can't even fight back. Forget about having radars. They don't even have air defenses left. And so it's absolutely embarrassing when an American aircraft gets shot down, when a second American aircraft goes to rescue the first one and gets shot down, when the helicopters going to rescue the Americans are getting shot at, to then, it completely blows the narrative up. The U.S. doesn't have air superiority, air control over Iran. They have some ability to operate over the country, but you do have to wonder if maybe the U.S. is running out of the standoff munitions that could be fired from their fighter jets. And so for the first time during this conflict, rather than firing missiles from Iraqi, Kuwaiti airspace, from over the Persian Gulf, from just inside Iranian territory, that were actually being forced to fly over Iranian cities to drop these munitions. And it turns out that Iran does have somewhat capable air defenses remaining. So I really think this blows up the White House narrative, and that's why they're so upset about this. Let's hear what Donald Trump had to say.
And we know who, and you know who we're talking about, because some things you can't do. Because when they did that, all of a sudden, the entire country of Iran knew that there was a pilot that was somewhere on their land that was fighting for his life. And it also made it much more difficult for the pilots and for the people going in to search for him. All of a sudden, they know that there's somebody out there. They see all these planes coming in. It became a much more difficult operation, because a leaker leaked that we have one, we've rescued one, but there's another one out there that we're trying to get. So actually, the country, Iran, put out a major notice, you all saw it, offering a very big award for anybody that captures the pilot. So, in addition to a hostile, very talented, very good, very evil military, we had millions of people trying to get an award. So, when you add that to it, but we have to find that leaker because that's a sick person.
So Donald Trump was right, and all the Iranian people hate their government and love the American pilots dropping bombs on their country. Why are they hunting them? Shouldn't they be welcoming them into their homes and helping to smuggle them back to Iraq safely into American arms? Why are they hunting them to turn them over to the Iranian government if these are their liberators? Clearly, this isn't the case. And again, I think this really goes to show that Donald Trump is a very, very dangerous, unstable, and likely mentally unwell man right now. And if there's any real courage in the administration, I think they have to seriously start talking about the 25th Amendment, or at least resigning their post and denouncing what Donald Trump is doing, because he's destroying our country along with much of the economies of the rest of the world and Iran and a lot of the Middle East. All right, everybody, that will do it for the show today. Please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. It really does help us out. We are growing just past 4,000 subscribers last week. And we are, because we're growing and because everything's going well, we've actually added a fourth show every week. That show will be Friday at 4:45 Eastern. Because we're a growing channel, we're able to get bigger names on the show. So we got Trita Parsi coming up on Thursday, and all that is largely because of the support that we get from the community, people who are liking, sharing, subscribing, commenting on videos. Of course, we do release this in podcast only, and you can find it on my X handle at Kyle Anslone _. Really appreciate all your support, and we'll be back on Wednesday.